Jesus, because he had already been born. And when they came to Herod and said, "Where is he?" he didn't know. But Herod immediately called in his priests, he called in the educated people, he called in everybody that should know. He called in the common priests who were dressed in common clothing. And then he called in the high priests who were dressed in gold and every ornaments and all of that sort of thing. And when they gathered together, all they knew was that there was a star. And these people, the Magi, who were astronomers, and in those days they had a lot of astronomers. They weren't stargazers. They didn't believe in stars ruling things. They were men of God. They were dedicated Jews. They were dedicated to find this place and this little boy that had been born. And so they had traveled 1,000 miles across the desert. They brought many precious ornaments with them. Among them was gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And Herod had enough sense to know that this must be for real, or these men, smart as they are and wise as they are, would not have come across that desert where there's thieves and there's robbers and there's people would kill them and take all they had if they only knew who they were and what they had. So he said, there must be something to this story. You see, God is so powerful and so mighty, he can make the unbeliever, when he thinks about it, he has to admit that there's something to this story. I know who Jesus is, you know who he is, but there's a lot of folk today don't know who he is, but they believe there's something to this story. That's why that Christmas controls a lot of things. On how much money people spend, the stock market will go up or it will go down. That means those people know that there's a Jesus, they know that there's a Christmas, but they don't really know who he is. But these men, wise men, they knew who he was, and they wanted to find him. And so Herod also wanted to find him. And Herod said, now listen, when you guys go out, you find that star and you find that little baby, you come back and get me. Now if it had been earlier days, he would have got on his horse and he would have rode with them. But he was so crippled up and his disease and his sins that he wasn't able to ride a horse. And so he said, when you find him, you bring him unto me. I want to worship him also. That was false. That was a lie. He had no intention of worshiping Jesus. I thank God this morning when I walked in this church, when we took communion, I had one thing in mind, and that was to worship the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the God of glory that I know still lives and reigns today, and his name is Jesus Christ, the Son of a living God. Now we know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. Now, here's how God works things. This temple was about 600 yards from his palace. When Jesus was 8 days old, when he was only 8 days old, that's when they brought him to the temple to be officially named and to be circumcised. And Jesus, Joseph and Mary brought him to the temple that day for those two reasons. And Jesus, that day, he got the name Jesus. Now, that name Jesus came from Jesse, Ben Joseph, which means Jesus. Now, Herod didn't know that. But he sat within 600 yards of this little baby that was 8 days old that he wanted to destroy, but God kept him sealed, and he had no idea that he was only 600 yards away. And then when 40 days later, they brought Jesus back to the same place. They brought him back to the temple again. In 40 days, they brought him to be dedicated unto the Lord. That's when the Jewish rabbis and so on laid on hands and dedicated and prayed prayers over the children and dedicated them to God. And that's when they brought Jesus back to Jerusalem again. Once again, they came within 600 yards of the man that wanted to destroy him, but they didn't know that he was there. Do you know that the people that are killing people today and destroying people people. Jesus is all around them, and they don't know that He's there. But you know what? We know when we hear of the murders and the slaughter and all that's being done in the Middle East, we know that Jesus is there, and they just won't recognize Him. The one they want to kill, they'll never be able to do it, because Jesus, God, is going to prevail in now and in the end. And so then, when He found out that the Magi wasn't coming back, they saw through his deceit. You know, I can see through the deceit of the devil. You as a Christian can see through the deceit of the devil. But ISIS can't see through the deceit of the devil. Islam cannot see through the deceit of the devil. Jesus is everywhere. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. But yet they're trying to destroy Him, and He is in the very presence of some Christian somewhere, and they don't even recognize it. And so this king got scared again. He got all upset and worried because he's afraid that Julius Caesar was going to be breathing down his neck. He thought he would be coming in because Jerusalem was ruled by Herod, and Jerusalem was ruled by the Roman rule. And therefore he had put Herod in charge of it as an appointment, and he'd been there for 30 years. And he had been killing everybody that showed any resistance. Even one of his wives, and he had 10 wives. And they had 2 sons by him. And when he heard that Maremma was going to come and deceive him and try to overthrow his throne, he had her slaughtered, he had her mother slaughtered, he had his 2 sons slaughtered. And so therefore Caesar, sitting in Rome, said it'd be better to be a pig, to be Herod's pig than to be his child. That's how mean and wicked that he was. So it was no problem for him to call in the Roman soldiers and send out a decree. Go find that little baby, because when you do, I want you to kill him. And if you would know that they couldn't find him because they didn't know where he was. And so he sent out a decree that every child under the age of 2 years would be slaughtered and killed. They could do it any way they wanted. Usually it was by taking a sharp sword and cutting their heads off. Sometimes the Roman soldiers who had no conscience would put their big hands around the baby's neck and choke it to death. They would pull it from a crying and screaming mother's arms, and they would take it and they would strangle it or kill it. Another way would to be take it up on a pinnacle and pitch it down and let it fall to the earth. That's what Herod did to people that he didn't like. And he'd take them up on the top of the mount and he'd make them jump off, and it'd be called a suicide. They would laugh and they would jest at it when it happened. Brother, listen, there was things surrounding the birth of Jesus Christ that sometimes we don't think about. It was not always easy for Joseph and Mary. We think about what fortunate people they were. Oh, what a blessing it must be. Listen, folk, I want to tell you today, it is a blessing to be a child of God. It's a blessing to know Jesus Christ. But sometimes the enemy comes, and we have to be prepared for that enemy. We have to be ready for it, and we have to know who Jesus is, or else we might cave in unto that enemy, which is called Satan, that is out to destroy Jesus Christ. From the moment he left the womb, he had enemies. And brother, from the time that he left the womb until he comes back again and breaks the eastern sky, Jesus Christ is going to have enemies and ruthless people, those that don't care who they kill, who they martyr, or what they do to destroy them. They want him dead. Now